the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
Did you miss a moment? And that leads me to my next question, John. Of the 4 wildcard losers, who do you think is most likely not to make it back into the postseason next year?
The Marlins. If only because that roster was just shouldn't have made the postseason in the first place. I think, like I said, more the beneficiary of the Cubs completely falling apart than anything. I mean, they had a good September. I don't want to take that away from the Marlins. But again, based on the peripherals, based on the numbers, should have been a below 500 team, a team with no real offense to speak of, down its 2 top starters. Again, no surprise what happened against the Phillies. That the Phillies, I think, were the most favored team by our odds in the wild card round, and they showed why. But if you're the Marlins, you're going into next season with the exact same problem you've gone into the last seemingly 3 seasons with, if not forever. Where is the offense going to come from? Last year, they tried to figure that out by dealing Pablo Lopez for Luis Arias. And for the most part, that worked. Lopez had a very good season, but Arias also had a very good season. That trade benefited everybody. This year, or this offseason, Jorge Soler is a free agent. More likely than not, I think that he's going to walk, given the kind of up and down nature of his performance in Miami. You know, again, I've talked about this on the show before. You know, you look at Miami's farm system, there is not a lot of top end offensive talent. It's still, you know, the number one guy in their system right now is the delightfully named Yiddy Cap, or Cappe, Cappe, Cuban infielder who is all the way down in high A. Not a guy I think you would expect to be a part of the 2024 Marlins. You know, similarly, you know, you're talking about maybe guys like Jacob Berry, Joe Mack, Victor Mesa Jr. eventually, maybe Xavier Edwards. Those dudes are still pretty far away. Edwards is probably the most likely to make an impact next year, but he's a very Marlins type player in that he's fast, he hits for contact, but there's not really a whole lot of power in his game. And again, you keep seeing this with the Marlins, the struggle to put runs on the board, the struggle to hit for power. The pitching has been there, will always be there, but on the other hand, and a lot of this is going to depend on what happens with Alcantara. If this sprained elbow essentially heals on its own, or if this is a precursor to Tommy John. If it's the latter, that Marlins rotation is all of a sudden looking very, very thin for next year with Yuri Perez, Jesus Luzardo, Braxton Garrett, and a whole lot of question marks beyond that. You know, what version of Trevor Rogers can they get? Is Max Meyer ready to come back from Tommy John surgery? You know, who of those young guys is realistically capable of stepping up? They've got a lot of great young prospects in their system pitching wise. Their two top draft picks in 2023, Noble Meyer and Thomas White. They've got Dax Fulton in Double-A. They've got Patrick Monteverde and Jacob Miller down a little further down, and Carson Meebrow. But there's still, you know, the pitching depth that had kind of helped keep this team afloat and that had made them a viable contender has really been chipped away at this point. You know, they traded Lopez. They might be out Alcantara next season. Sixto Sanchez, clearly, I'm openly curious if he's even going to be able to pitch again. He's been out so long with his various arm injuries. They've had a lot of attrition due to injury. They traded one of their better pitching prospects to get Jake Berger from the White Sox at the deadline. I'm really curious what Miami's going to do this offseason, if there's any realistic chance that ownership opens up the checkbook even just a little bit to allow Kim Ng to add some offense, because this team really is going to need it. You know, I don't think we can expect that the Mets are going to lose 85 games again next season, or 90 games, or however many games they lost. The Braves are still going to be really good. The Phillies are still going to be really good. The Nationals should be a little bit better, and they were not a terrible team necessarily last year. They weren't a good one, or this past season. They weren't a good one, but they were not pushovers either. You know, the NL East is crowded, and there's no guarantee either that the Marlins are going to be able to make hay in the wild card race again, because you would expect that the NL West teams will all be back. You'll expect that the Reds should be better. You would expect that the Cubs should be there again. You expect the Cardinals, I think, to be better than they were. You know, there's no guarantee for the Marlins here. So I can very easily see a world in which they are nowhere near the playoff chase next year, particularly if they don't get the offense they need. Otherwise, like you said, I do worry about the Blue Jays. They do really need to figure something out with that offense and what's going on. But I think it's pretty safe to say Tampa will be there. And it's hard to argue against Milwaukee, even though there's a very pivotal offseason for them and what they're going to do with Corbin Burns, perhaps. But the NL Central is always so weak that I can't really, I think the Marlins are a much likelier team to miss than, say, the Brewers would be.
Yeah, because the NL Central is just what it is. I think it's the Blue Jays for me. I think this was their shot. I think the Orioles aren't going anywhere. I think it's going to be a situation where a lot went right for them in the wild card chase and the AL East as a whole. The Rays just are more sustainable, and I also think the Orioles are in a better spot. And I don't know what the Red Sox and the Yankees are going to do this offseason, but I don't know. My gut tells me the Blue Jays are trending in a very very tricky situation now. And
I mean, you do have to worry that the window is starting to close, the one that they
yes.
basically opened up when they started calling up all these guys. And obviously, and we'll talk about it when the offseason rolls around and we look at the Blue Jays in particular, that the big question they're going to have going forward is when and how do we approach Bo Bichette and Vlad Jr. about long-term deals? Because those are going to cost a lot. It's going to cost a lot of money to get those two guys signed long-term.
Yeah.
And, how is that going to affect their ability to spend in the offseason? How is that going to affect their decision-making in the offseason is, knowing, hey, these two guys, the cornerstones of our offense, the cornerstones of this team, we need to get them locked up sooner rather than later. What is that going to cost us? And how are we going to manage around the edges when you're already starting to see, again, George Springer is starting to slow down. When, you have when your veteran guys like Merrifield and Belt, who admittedly had a good season, when you're counting on those veteran bats and you don't really necessarily know what you're going to get out of them, when you had your best young pitcher in Alek Manoah take such a huge step backwards that I think it's an open question as to what you're going to get from him going forward. I think there was this expectation with the Blue Jays that, with all those young guys, with all those the prospects they were bringing up, sustainability was going to be easy for them. But we're now starting to reach that point in the player salary curve where the cheapness is not going to be there much longer. They still have a lot of money they owe Kevin Gausman going forward. They have a lot of money they owe Chris Bassett going forward. They have a lot of money they owe Jose Barrios going forward after signing him to a big extension. Again, they're going to have to find the room for extensions for Bichette and Guerrero, presumably. Like, they're running out of guys who can give you top end production for bottom of the barrel dollars, and it's really hard to develop those guys ad infinitum unless you're the Dodgers or the Rays. So a lot of it's also going to be banking on the Blue Jays player development system to start cranking up the support that they need so that they don't have to go fishing in free agency for all these guys, because, things are about to start getting expensive in Toronto. And like you said, the Orioles are ascendant. The Rays are perpetually strong. I expect the Yankees and the Red Sox to be loud this offseason because both of those fan bases are going to be calling for it, particularly in New York. So, I think it's worrisome if you're a Blue Jays fan. I think it is a worrisome time to think about, okay, what is this franchise? Where is the opportunity for this franchise going to be going forward? I don't think this year was one where they never looked like realistic contenders this year. I don't think this is something like, necessarily a blown opportunity, but it's at the very least, it's another year pulled off the calendar where they didn't win the World Series, where their playoff stay was very short. It does raise the question of, what do they need to do to get better, and how are they going to make that happen as things are starting to get more expensive and as the division is starting to get more difficult.
Yeah. I'm very curious to see what happens with the Blue Jays next year. They're a team to monitor early on. John, the best performance from the wild card round for you was who?
That's tough. I love Corbin Carroll. I thought he had a phenomenal 2 games against Milwaukee. He displayed all the tools that make you realize, like, and one of the things I love about the postseason is, most people watching the playoff games, if they were not a Diamondbacks fan, probably had not seen a whole lot of Corbin Carroll this year. The Diamondbacks are not a national broadcast team. They weren't expected to be a big time contender. Corbin Carroll, obviously, for people in the